Hey everyone, it's Adam Tracy, and there's been some discussion within the SEC about DeFi lending and how that could be regulated. And for as much as you hear about the Howey test, there's another case called Reves that relates to debt. Like, when is a note a security? And there's three primary elements to it, right? Motivation of the parties. Is it for raising capital, or is it like a business personal type loan? The plan of distribution, is this debt or quasi debt instrument being offered to the public widely? And then three, the reasonable expectation of the investing public. Like, what would a prospective investor view this vehicle as? So starting from the bottom and going back up, when you look at DeFi lending, right, what's the reasonable expectation? Well, my reasonable expectation is to earn interest, right, to earn a return, much like a typical note. So that weighs heavily towards like a DeFi protocol, right? Which, again, like, you're lending to a liquidity pool, which is in turn giving you these tokens, which don't necessarily resemble a note, but give you the inherent right to receive interest thereupon, right? So logically, I'm out for interest. I wouldn't make the loan, presumably, or nobody else would, if I wasn't going to earn interest. So that would weigh towards it being a security. Two, when you talk about, is it widely available, like the investment opportunity, the quasi debt instrument, note, whatever you want to call it? Yes, like, so anybody with crypto, right, can effectively connect to the smart contract and lend into that liquidity pool, right? So it is widely available. There's no pre-qualification or some kind of, limitation, right? There could be, but there just generally isn't. So that weighs towards DeFi loans being treated as securities. And then you have the motivation of the parties, which isn't as clear. So from the perspective of the lender, right, me putting in tokens into the liquidity pool, well, it's not like a personal loan. There's not like a business I'm in it for the commercial return, right? Again, I'm not doing it for my health. Now, on the flip side, right, because it's a two-part sort of analysis for this first tenet of Reves, the borrower, which is effectively like a liquidity pool, right, what's their purpose? Is it to raise money, right? Is it to raise money as you would like selling stock or selling promissory notes, to raise capital to further the business in any way, shape, or form? Well, you could argue that it's not, because a liquidity pool, but just by nature of how it operates, you could make the argument that it's just this sort of facilitation, and it's not necessarily developing or creating like assets or really anything. It's just really just the facilitation of liquidity, right? And that's it. So there's arguments being made currently, right? And there's these discussions ongoing between term finance and different DeFi lending platforms and the SEC about where this may fall, right? And I think even when you analyze the first tenet, right, which is the motivation of the parties, the argument that the adding liquidity is somehow not akin to raising capital when your business, right, is effectively creating this ecosystem for a token, right? That's your business. So the liquidity portion is essential to that business. Yes, like, you're repaying it back, and no, that capital isn't being deployed like outside that ecosystem, right, in the sense of buying equipment or what have you in like the real world. But you kind of weigh heavily, skew more towards the security side of things. So then it brings you to the fourth point, which isn't an element of Reves. It's not even an element of Howey, which would also apply to the analysis of DeFi lending, but less so because we're talking about debt. Whereas Howie talks about something arcane called an investment contract, which really lends itself more to equity, and that's what you've seen and heard about for years now. But the concept of, is there like a true issuer, right? And again, that is not part of the Reves or Howie test, but in a decentralized environment, there is effectively no issuer, right? You have smart contracts and protocols, an algorithm handling the whole thing. But, and like I've made this argument in so many different contexts, right? Ranging from like DAO to DeFi, DEXs, whatever you're talking about. You can't have a listless ship. You can't have like the headless horseman in crypto, but not have it anywhere else, right? And at some point, it takes human intervention. This isn't the Borg, right? Like it didn't just come out of nowhere. And at some point, human intervention was required, even if it was just to develop the smart contract and send it on its, publish it and send it, it's on its way. There are people, the wizards behind the screen, right? So the argument, although it's not part of Reves or Howie for that matter, we're only really talking about Reves today, it's probative, right? And you could argue that these loans are like one-sided in the sense that, or at least how I would argue it, is that, well, if I'm an investor, I'm not actually contracting with ABC entity. I'm entering into a one-sided arrangement with a smart contract that dictates when, where, if I get paid, and just basically allocates, especially if it's a non-custodial arrangement, it does nothing, right? It just shifts the money around. So that's, I think, the argument where a lot of these DeFi platforms are coming from, because obviously if, and there hasn't been today, but if there was to be enforcement relating to DeFi and it was classified as a security, well, then you go down the rabbit hole of having to have is this a exempt offering under Reg D 506C? Do we have to register these loans of and that's where it makes it very difficult, right? Because I can lend you $10, I can lend you $100. Well, what are you registering, right? Just from the perspective of what is the actual security? It would require some sort of standardization, which isn't really key to DeFi, nor kind of, in a way, kind of goes against everything that DeFi is conceivably altruistically thought of. So that's Reves. And you can take the analysis, if you want to flip it up and give reliance on the tokenized aspect, I'm not buying a node, I'm buying a token that gives me stake and liquidity pool, things like that. But then you fall under Howie and it doesn't get really much better. But Reves is, I think, overlooked, right? And people rely on Howie, where in the lending and especially in DeFi, Reves is really the more pertinent discussion. And I think as it stands right now, the arguments that people are putting forth to the SEC about something not being a security in terms of DeFi lending may not hold water. But we'll see. Hopefully there is. Hopefully there's some legislation that exempts them. We'll see. But that's the nature of the beast right now. So if you're looking to get into that business or have questions about it, definitely hit me up, Adam at adamtracy.io. I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.